Joe knew from the Malleus Maleficarum and other grimoires what the rite was, and he was both excited and frightened. He approached the altar nervously, noting the others forming a pentagon around the nude woman and himself. She had a lovely body with large breasts and fine nipples, but he was still too nervous to become aroused physically. Padre Pedrastia handed him the host. I stole this from the church myself, he whispered. You can be sure it is fully consecrated and completely potent. You know what to do? Joe nodded, unable to meet the priest's lascivious eyes. He took the host and spat upon it quickly. The greasiness and electrically charged quality of the air seemed to increase sharply. The light seemed harsher, like the glint of a sword, just as schizophrenics often describe light as a hostile or destructive force. He stepped forward and placed the host upon the thighs of the bride of Satan. Immediately, she moaned softly, as if the simple touch were more erotic than one momentary contact could possibly be. Her legs spread voluptuously, and the middle of the host crumpled as it sunk slightly into her red pubic hair. The effect was, at once, powerful. Her whole body shuddered, and the host was drawn farther into her obviously moist cunt. Using his finger, Joe pushed it the rest of the way in, and she began breathing in a hoarse staccato rhythm. Joe Malik knelt to complete the rite. He felt like a fool and a pervert. He had never performed oral sex, or any kind of sex, in front of an audience before. He wasn't even turned on erotically. He went ahead just to find out if there was any real magic in this revolting lunacy. As soon as his tongue entered her, she began heaving, and he knew her first orgasm would arrive rapidly. His penis finally began swelling. He began licking the host caressingly. Inside his temple, a drum seemed to be beating hollowly. He hardly noticed it when she came. His senses spun, and he looked more, aware only that she flowed more heavily and thickly than any woman he had known. He put his thumb in her anus and his middle finger in her vagina, keeping his tongue in the clitoral area, doing it upright. This was the technique occultists call the rite of Shiva. Irreverently, he remembered that swingers call it the one-man band. He felt an unusual electrical quality in her pubic hair, and was aware of a heaviness and tension in his penis more powerful than he had ever known in his life. But all else was drowned out by the drumming in his head, the cunt taste, cunt smell, cunt warmth. She was Ishtar, Aphrodite, Venus. The experience was so intense he began to feel a real religious dimension to it. Hadn't some 19th century anthropologist argued that cunt worship was the earliest religion? He didn't even know this woman, and yet he had an emotion beyond love. True reverence. Trippy, as Simon would say. How many times she came, he never knew. He came himself, without once touching his penis, when the host was finally dissolved. He staggered back dizzily, and the air now seemed as resistant to motion as brackish water. Yoga Sotota Nebladzin, the priest began chanting. By Ashtoreth, by Pan Pagenitor, by the yellow sign, by the gifts I have made and the powers I have purchased, by he who is not to be named, by Rabban and by Azathoth, by Samael, by Aman and Ra, Vente, Vente, Lucifer, Luxfiat. Joe never saw it. He felt it, and it was like chemical mace, blinding and numbing him at once. Come not in that form, the priest screamed. By Jesu Elohim and the powers that you fear, I command thee, come not in that form. Yad he vahe, come not in that form. One of the women began weeping in fear. Quiet, you fool, Simon shouted at her. Don't give it more power. Your tongue is bound until I release it, the priest said to her. But the distraction of his attention had its cost. Joe felt it growing in potency again, and so did the others, judging from their sudden involuntary gasps. Come not in that form, the priest shouted. By the cross of gold, and by the rose of ruby, and by Mary's son, I command and demand it of thee. Come not in that form. By thy master, Kronzon, by Pangenitor and Panphage, come not in that form. There was a hiss, like air pouring into a vacuum, and the atmosphere began to clear, but it also dropped abruptly in temperature. Master, call no more upon those names. I meant not to alarm thee. The voice was the most shocking experience of the night for Joe. It was oily, flattering, obscenely humble, but there was still within it a secret strength that revealed all too well that the priest's power over it, however obtained, was temporary, that both of them knew it, and that the price of that power was something it longed to collect. "Come not in that form either," said the priest, more stern and more confident. "Ye know full well that such tones and manners are also intended to frighten, and I like not such jokes. Come in this form which thou habitually wearest in thy current earthly activities, or I shall banish thee back to that realm of which you like not to imagine. I command, I command, I command." There was nothing campy about the Padre now. It was just a room again, an odd medieval Mid-Eastern room, but just a room. The figure that stood among them could not have looked less like a demon. "Okay," it said in a pleasant American voice. "We don't have to get touchy and hostile with each other over little theatrics, do we? Just tell me what sort of business transaction you went and dragged me here for, and I'm sure we can work out all the details in a down-home, business-like, cards-on-a-table fashion with no hard feelings and mutual satisfaction all around." It looked like Billy Graham. "The Kennedys. Martin Luther King? You are fantastically naive still, George. It goes back much, much farther." Hagbard was relaxing with some Alamont black hash after the Battle of Atlantis. Look at the pictures of Woodrow Wilson in his last months, the haggard look, the vague eyes, and in fact symptoms of a certain slow-acting and undetectable poison. They slipped it to him at Versailles. Or look into the Lincoln Caper. Who opposed the Greenback Plan? The closest thing to flax script America ever had. Stanton, the banker. Who ordered all roads out of Washington closed except one? Stanton, the banker. And Booth went straight for that road. Who got a hold of Booth's diary afterward? Stanton, the banker. And turned it over to the archives with 17 pages missing? Stanton, the banker. George, you have so much to learn about real history. The Reverend William Helmer, religious columnist for Confrontation, stared at the telegram. Joe Malik was supposed to be in Chicago covering the SDS convention. What was he doing in Providence, Rhode Island? And what was he involved in that could provoke such an extraordinary communication? Helmer reread the telegram carefully. "Drop next month's column. Will pay large bonus for prompt answers to these questions. First, trace all movements of Reverend Billy Graham during last week and find out if he could possibly have gotten to Chicago surreptitiously. Second, send me a list of reliable books on Satanism and witchcraft in the modern world. Tell nobody else on the magazine about this. Wire me, courtesy of Jerry Mallory, Hotel Benefit, Providence, Rhode Island. P.S. Find out where the John Dillinger Died for You Society has its headquarters. Joe Malik." Those SDS kids must have turned him on with acid, Helmer decided. Well, he was still the boss, and he paid nice bonuses when he pleased. Helmer reached for the phone. Howard, the dolphin, was singing a very satirical song about sharks as he swam to meet the Leif Erikson at Payos. James Walking Bear had no great love for palefaces most of the time, but he had just dropped 6 peyote buttons before this Professor Mallory arrived, and he was feeling benevolent and forgiving. After all, the road chief once said at a very sacred midsummer peyote festival that the line about forgiving those who trespass against us had a special meaning for Indians. Only when we all forgave the whites, he had said, would our hearts be totally pure. And when our hearts were pure, the curse would be lifted. The white men would cease to trespass, go home to Europe, and vex one another instead of persecuting us. James tried to forgive the professor for being white and found, as usual, that peyote made forgiveness easier. "Billy Frechette," he said. "Hell, she died back in '68. "I know that," the professor said. "What I'm looking for is any photographs she may have left." "Sure." James knew what kind of photographs. "You mean ones that had Dillinger in them?" "Yes. She was his mistress, virtually his common-law wife for a long time, and, no soap, your year's too late. Reporters bought up everything she had that showed even the back of Dillinger's head, way back, long before she came here to the reservation to die." "Well, did you know her?" "Sure." James was careful not to be spiteful and didn't add, All Menominee Indians know one another in a way you whites can't understand knowing. Did she ever converse about Dillinger? Of course. Old women always talk about their dead men. Always say the same thing, too. Never was another man as good as him, except when they say there never was another man as bad as him. They only say that when they're drunk, though. The pale-face kept turning colors, the way people do when you're on peyote. Now he almost looked like an Indian. That made it easier to talk to him. Did she ever say anything about John's attitude toward the Masons? Why shouldn't people turn colors? All the trouble in the world came from the fact that they usually stayed the same color. James nodded profoundly. As usual, peyote had brought him a big truth. If whites and blacks and Indians were turning colors all the time, there wouldn't be any hate in the world, because nobody would know which people to hate. I said, did she ever mention John's attitude toward the Masons? Oh yeah. Funny you should ask that. The man had a halo around his head now, and James wondered what that meant. Every time he took peyote alone, things like this would happen, and he'd end up wishing there were a road chief or some other priest around to explain these signs properly. But what about the Masons? Oh, yes. Billy said the Masons were the only people John Dillinger really hated. He said they railroaded him to prison the first time, and they owned all the banks, so he was getting even by robbing them. The professor's mouth dropped open in surprise and delight, and James thought it was kind of funny to see that, especially with the halo turning from pink to blue to pink to blue to pink again at the same time. A big mouth, a tiny brain, he only thinks of blood and pain, Howard sang. Notes found by a TWA stewardess in a seat vacated by a Mr. John Mason after a Madison, Wisconsin to Mexico City flight, June 29, 1969, 1 week after the last SDS convention of all time. We only rob from the banks what the banks rob from the people. Dillinger, Crown Point Jail, 1934. Could have come from any anarchist text. Lucifer, bringer of light. Weishaupt's illumination and Voltaire's enlightenment, from the Latin lux, meaning light. Christianity, all in threes, Trinity, etc. Buddhism in fours, Illuminism in fives. A progression? Hopi teaching, all men have 4 souls now, but in future will have 5 souls. Find an anthropologist for more data on this. Who decided the Pentagon building should have that particular shape? Kick out the jams, cross-check. Adam, the first man. Vice, to know. Haupt, chief or leader. The first man to be a leader of those who know. Assumed name from the beginning. Ayok Sotot in Penacodic manuscripts. CD, B. Yog Sothoth. D-E-A-T-H. Don't ever antagonize the horn. Does Pension know? Must get Simon to explain the yellow sign and the Aklo chants. Might need protection. C says the H neophobe type outnumbers us 1,000 to 1. If so, all this is hopeless. What gets me is how much has been out in the open for so long, not just in Lovecraft, Joyce, Melville, etc., or in the Bugs Bunny cartoons, but in scholarly works that pretend to explain. Anybody who wants to go to the trouble can find out, for instance, that the secret of the Eleusinian mysteries was the words whispered to the novice after he got the magic mushroom. Osiris is a black god. 5 words, of course, but no historian, archaeologist, anthropologist, folklorist, etc. has understood. Or those who did understand didn't care to admit it. Can I trust C? For that matter, can I trust Simon? This matter of Tlaloc should convince me one way or the other. He only thinks of blood and slaughter. The shark should live on land, not water. To hell with the shark and all his kin, and fight like hell when you see his fin. When Joe Malik got off the plane at Los Angeles International Airport, Simon was waiting for him. We'll talk in your car, Joe said briefly. The car, being Simon's, was naturally a psychedelic Volkswagen. Well, he asked as they drove out of the airport onto Central Avenue. It all checks out, Joe said with an odd calm. It did rain blue cats when they dug up Tlaloc. Mexico City has had unusual and unseasonable rains ever since. The missing tooth was on the right, and the corpse at the Biograph Theater had a missing tooth on the left. Billy Graham couldn't have gotten to Chicago by any normal means, so that was either the best damn makeup job in the history of show business and plastic surgery, or I witnessed a genuine miracle. And all the rest of it? The law of fives and all? I'm sold. I no longer claim membership in the Liberal Intellectual Guild. You behold in me a horrible example of creeping mysticism. Ready to try acid? Yes, Joe said. I'm ready to try acid. I only regret that I have but one mind to lose for my Shiva Darshana. Right on. First, though, you'll meet him. I'll drive right to his bungalow. It's not far from here. Simon began humming as he drove. Joe recognized the tune as the Fugues? Ramesses II is dead, my love. They drove for a while in silence, and Joe finally asked, How old is our little group exactly? Since 1888, Simon said. That's when Rhodes horned in and they kicked out the jams, like I told you in Chicago, after the Sabbath. And Karl Marx? A schmuck, a dupe, a nebbish from the word go. Simon made an abrupt turn. Here we are at his house, the greatest headache they had since Harry Houdini knocked out their spiritualist fronts. He grinned. How do you think you'll feel talking to a dead man? Weird, Joe said, but I've felt weird for the last week and a half. Simon parked the car and held the door open. Just think, he said. Hoover sitting there every day with a death mask on his desk and half suspecting, deep down in his bones, how he suckered him. They crossed the yard of the small, modest bungalow. What a front, eh? Simon chuckled. He knocked. A little old man, he was 5'7" exactly, Joe remembered from the FBI files, opened the door. Here's our new recruit, Simon said simply. Come in, John Dillinger said, and tell me how an asshole egghead like you can help us beat the shit out of those motherfucking Illuminati cocksuckers. They filled their books with obscene words, claiming that this is realism. Smiling Joe shouted to the KCUF assembly. It's not my idea of realism. I don't know anybody who talks in that gutter language they call realism, and they describe every possible perversion, acts against nature that are so outrageous I wouldn't sully this audience's ears by even mentioning their medical names. Some of them even glorify the criminal and the anarchist. I'd like to see the one of these hacks come up to me and look me in the eye and say, I didn't do it for money. I was honestly trying to tell a good, honest story that would teach people something of value. They couldn't say that. The lie would stick in their throats. Who can doubt where they would get their orders from? What person in this audience needs to be told what group is behind this overflowing sewer of smut and filth? May storms and rains and typhoons beat them, Howard sang on. May great Cthulhu rise and eat them. I got into the jams in Michigan City Prison, Dillinger, much relaxed and less arrogant, was saying as he, Simon, and Joe sat in his living room drinking Black Russians. And Hoover knew? From the beginning? Joe asked. Of course. I wanted the bastard to know. Him and every other high-ranking Mason and Rosicrucian and Illuminati front man in the country. The old man laughed harshly, except for his unmistakable eyes, which still held the strange blend of irony and intensity that Joe had noted in 1930s photos. He was indistinguishable from any other elderly fellow who had come to California to enjoy his last years in the sun. The first bank job I pulled off in Daleville, Indiana, I used the line that I always repeated. Lie down on the floor and keep calm. Hoover couldn't miss it. That's been the motto of the jams ever since Diogenes the Cynic. He knew no ordinary bank robber would be quoting an obscure Greek philosopher. The reason I repeated it on every heist was just to rub it in and let him know I was taunting him. But going back to Michigan City Prison, Joe prompted, sipping his drink. Pierpont was the one who initiated me. He had been with the jams for years by then. I was just a kid, in my early 20s, and I had only pulled one job, a real botch. I couldn't understand why I got such a stiff sentence after the DA promised me clemency if I pled guilty, and I was kind of bitter. But old Harry Pierpont saw my potential. At first I thought he was just another big house faggot when he started tracking me around and asking me all sorts of personal questions. But it was what I wanted to become, a successful bank robber, so I played along. To tell you the truth, I was so horny it wouldn't have mattered if he was a faggot. You have no idea how horny a man gets in prison. That's why Babyface Nelson and a lot of other guys preferred to die rather than go back to the big house again. Hell, if you haven't been there, you can't understand. You just don't know what being horny is. Well, anyway, after a lot of bull about Jesus and Jehovah and the Bible and all that, Harry just asked me point blank one day in the prison yard, "Do you think it's possible there might be a true religion?" I was about to say bullshit, like there might be an honest cop, but something stopped me. I realized he was dead serious, and a lot might depend on my answer, so I was cautious. I said, "If there is, I haven't heard about it," and he just came back real quiet. "Most people haven't." It was a couple of days afterward that he brought the subject up again. Then he went right back on with it, showed me the sacred chow and everything. It took my breath away. The old man's voice trailed off as he sank into silent memories. "And it really does go back to Babylon?" Joe prompted. "I'm not much of an intellectual," Dillinger replied. "Action is my arena. Let Simon tell you that part." Simon was eager to leap into the breach. "The basic book to confirm our tradition," he said, "is the seven tablets of creation, which is dated about 2500 BC, the time of Sargon. It describes how Tiamat and Apsu, the first gods, were coexisting in Mumu, the primordial chaos. Von Junst, in his Unaussprechlichen Kulten, tells how the justified ancients of Mumu originated just about the time the seven tablets were inscribed. You see, under Sargon, the chief deity was Marduk. I mean, that was the high priest gave out to the public. In private, of course, they worshipped Ayok Sotat, who became the Yog Sothoth of the Necronomicon. But maybe I'm going too fast. Getting back to the official religion of Marduk, it was based on usury. The priests monopolized the medium of exchange and were able to extract interest for lending it. They also monopolized the land and extracted tribute for renting it. It was the beginning of what we laughingly call civilization, which has always rested on rent and interest. The old Babylonian con. The official story was that Mumu was dead, killed in the war between the gods. When the first anarchist group arose, they called themselves Justified Ancients of Mumu. Like Lao Tse and the Taoists in China, they wanted to get rid of usury and monopoly and all the other pig shit of civilization, and go back to a natural way of life. So, Grok. They took the supposedly dead god, Mumu, and claimed he was still alive and was actually stronger than all the other gods. They had a good argument. Look around, they'd say. What do you see most of? Chaos, right? Therefore, the god of chaos is the strongest god and is still alive. Of course, we got our ass whipped good. We were just no match for the Illuminati in those days. Didn't have a clue about how they performed their miracles, for instance, so we got our asses whipped again in Greece when the jams got started again as part of the Cynic movement. By the time the whole thing was happening again in Rome, usury and monopoly and the whole bag of tricks, the truce took place. The Justified Ancients became part of the Illuminati, a special group still keeping our own name, but taking orders from the Five. We thought we'd humanize them, like the anarchists who stayed in SDS after last year. And so it went until 1888. Then Cecil Rhodes started the Circle of Initiates and a big schism occurred. Every meeting would have a faction of Rhodes boys carrying signs that said, "Kick out the jams." It was the parting of the ways. They just didn't trust us, or maybe they were afraid of being humanized. But we had learned a lot by our long participation in the Illuminati conspiracy, and now we know how to fight them with their own weapons. "Fuck their weapons," Dillinger interrupted. "I like to fight them with my weapons." "You were behind the big unsolved bank robberies of the last few years." "Sure. Just in the planning, though. I'm too old to vault over tellers' cages and carry on like I did back in the 30s. "John is also fighting on another front," Simon interjected. Dillinger laughed. "Yes," he said. "I'm the president of Laughing Buddha Jesus Phallus, Inc. You've seen them. If it's not an LBJP, it's not an LP. "Laughing Buddha Jesus Phallus?" Joe exclaimed. "My God, you put out the best rock in the country, the only rock a man my age can listen to without wincing." "Thanks," Dillinger said modestly. "Actually, the Illuminati owns the company that put out most of the rock. We started Laughing Buddha Jesus Phallus to counterattack. We were ignoring that front until they got the MC5 to cut a disc called Kick Out the Jams, just to taunt us with old bitter memories. So we came back with our own releases, and the next thing I knew, I was making bales of money from it. We've also fed information through third parties to Christian Crusade in Tulsa, Oklahoma, so they could expose some of what the Illuminati are doing in the rock field. You've seen the Christian Crusade publications, Rhythm, Riots, and Revolution, and Communism, Hypnotism, and the Beatles, and so forth? Yes, Joe said absently. I thought it was nut literature. It's so hard, he added, to grasp the whole picture. You'll get used to it, Simon smiled. It just takes a while to sink in. Who really did shoot John Kennedy? Joe asked. I'm sorry, Dillinger said. You're only a private in our army right now, not cleared for that kind of information yet. I'll just tell you this much. His initials are HC, so don't trust anybody with those initials, no matter where or how you meet him. He's being fair, Simon told Joe. You'll appreciate it later. And advancement is rapid, Dillinger added, and the rewards are beyond your present understanding. Give him a hint, John, Simon suggested with an anticipatory grin. Tell him how you got out of Crown Point Jail. I've read 2 versions of that, Joe said. Most of the sources claim you carved a fake gun out of balsa wood and dyed it black with your shoe polish. Toland's book says that you made that story up and leaked it out to protect the man who really managed the break for you, a federal judge that you bribed to smuggle in a real gun. Which was it? Neither, Dillinger said. Crown Point was known as the escape-proof jail before I crashed out of it, and believe me, it deserved the name. Do you want to know how I did it? I walked through the walls. Listen. Hare Krishna, Hare, Hare. The sun beat down on the town of Daleville on July 17th, 1933, like a rain of fire. Motoring down the main street, John Dillinger felt the perspiration on his neck. Although he had been paroled 3 weeks earlier, he was still pale from his 9 years in prison, and the sunlight was cruel on his almost albino-tinted skin. I'm going to have to walk through the door all by myself, he thought, all alone, and fighting every kind of fear and guilt that has been beaten into me from childhood on. The spirit of Moo is stronger than the Illuminati's technology, Pierpont had said. Pierpont. Remember that. We've got the second law of thermodynamics on our side. Chaos steadily increases all over the universe. All law and order is a kind of temporary accident. But I've got to walk through that door all alone. The secret of the 5 depends on it. This time, it's my turn to be the goat. Pierpont and Van Meter and the others were still back in Michigan City Prison. It was all in his hands, being the first one paroled. He had to raise the money to finance the jailbreak that would get the others out. Then, having proved himself, he would be taught the jam miracles. The band suddenly loomed before him, too suddenly. His heart skipped a beat. Then calmly, he drove his Chevrolet coupe over to the curb and parked. I should have prepared better. This car should be souped up like the ones Clyde Barrow uses. Well, I'll know that the next time. He left his hands on the steering wheel and squeezed hard. He took a deep breath and repeated the formula. 23 skidoo. It helped a little, but he still wanted to get the hell out of there. He wanted to drive straight back to his father's farm in Mooresville and find a job and learn all the straight things again, how to kiss a boss's ass and how to look the parole officer straight in the eye and be like everybody else. But everybody else was an Illuminati puppet and didn't know it. He did know it and was going to liberate himself. Hell, that's what a younger John Dillinger thought back in 1924, except that he hadn't known about the Illuminati or the jams then. But he was trying to liberate himself in his own way when he held up that grocer. And what did it lead to? 9 years of misery and monotony and almost going mad with horniness in a stinking cell. It'll be 9 years more if I fuck up today. The spirit of Moo is stronger than the Illuminati's technology. He got out of the car and forced his feet and legs to move, and he walked straight for the bank door. Fuck it, he said. 23 skidoo. He walked through the door, and then he did the thing the bank tellers remembered after and told the police. He reached up and adjusted his straw hat to the most dapper and debonair angle, and he grinned. All right, this is a stick-up, he said clearly, taking out his pistol. Everybody lie down on the floor and keep calm. None of you will get hurt. Oh, God, a female teller gasped. Don't shoot. Please don't shoot. Don't worry, honey, John Dillinger said easily. I don't want to hurt anybody. Just open the vault. Like a tree that's planted by the water. That afternoon, the old man said, I met Calvin Coolidge in the woods near my father's farm at Mooresville. I gave him the haul, $20,000, and it went into the jam treasury. He gave me 20 tons of hemp script. Calvin Coolidge? Joe Malik exclaimed. Well, of course. I knew it wasn't really Calvin Coolidge, but that was the form he chose to appear in. Who or what he really is, I haven't learned yet. You met him in Chicago, Simon added gleefully. He appeared as Billy Graham that time. You mean the dev? Satan, Simon said simply, is just another of the innumerable masks he wears. Behind the mask is a man, and behind the man is another mask. It's all a matter of merging multiverses. Remember, don't look for an ultimate reality. There isn't any. Then this person, this being, Joe protested, really is supernatural. Supernatural, schmoopernatural, Simon grimaced. You're still like the people in that mathematical parable about Flatland. You can only think in categories of right and left, and I'm talking about up and down, so you say supernatural. There is no supernatural. There are just more dimensions than you are accustomed to. That's all. If you were living in Flatland, and I stepped out of your plane into a plane at a different angle, it would look to you as if I vanished into thin air. Somebody looking down from our three-dimensional viewpoint would see me going off at a tangent from you and would wonder why you were acting so distressed and surprised about it. But the flash of light, it's an energy transformation, Simon explained patiently. Look, the reason you can only think three-dimensionally is because there are only three directions in cubical space. That's why the Illuminati and some of the kids they've allowed to become partially illuminized lately refer to ordinary science as square. The basic energy vector coordinates of the universe are five-dimensional, of course, and can best be visualized in terms of the five sides of the Illuminati Pyramid of Egypt. 5 sides, Joe objected. It only has 4. You're ignoring the bottom. Oh, go on. Energy is always triangular, not cubical. Bucky Fuller had a line on this, by the way. He's the first one outside the Illuminati to discover it independently. The basic energy transformation we're concerned with is the one Fuller hasn't discovered yet, although he said he's looking for it. The one that ties mind into the matter-energy continuum. The pyramid is the key. You take a man in the lotus position and draw lines from his pineal gland, the third eye, as the Buddhists call it, to his 2 knees, and from each knee to the other, and this is what you get. Simon sketched rapidly in his notepad and passed it over to Joe. It's an image of a man with his third eye closed, meditating. Next to it is a triangle with an eye at the top, pineal eye opened. The triangle is labeled energy field. When the pineal eye opens, after fear is conquered, that is, after your first bad trip, you can control the energy field entirely, Simon went on. An Irish Illuminatus of the 9th century, Scotus Ergina, put it very simply, in 5 words, of course, when he said, Omnia quia sunt lumina sunt. All things that are lights. Einstein also put it into 5 symbols when he wrote E equals mc squared. The actual transformation doesn't require atomic reactors and all that jazz. Once you learn how to control the mind vectors, but it always lets off one hell of a flash of light, as John can tell you. Damn near blinded me and knocked me on my ass the first time in the woods, Dillinger agreed, but I was sure glad to know the trick. I was never afraid of being arrested after that, because I could always walk out of any jail they put me in. That's why the feds decided to kill me, you know. It was embarrassing to always find me wandering around loose again a few days after they locked me up. You know the background to the Biograph Theater scam? They killed 3 guys in Chicago without giving them a chance to surrender because they thought I was one of them. Well, those 3 were all wanted in New York for armed robbery, so nobody criticized the cops much for that caper. But then up in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, they shot 3 very respectable businessmen, and one of them went and died. And Hoover's heroes called all sorts of crap from the newspapers. So I knew where it was at. I could never again surrender and walk away a few days later. We had to produce a body for them. The old man looked suddenly sad. There was one possibility that we hated to think about, but luckily it didn't come to that. The gimmick we finally worked out was perfect. And everything really follows the 5's law? Joe asked. More than you guess, Dillinger remarked blandly. Even when you're dealing with social fields, Simon added, we've run studies of cultures where the Illuminati were not in control, and they still follow Weishaupt's 5-stage pattern. Verwirrung, Zweitracht, Unordnung, Beamtenherrschaft, and Grummet. That is, chaos, discord, confusion, bureaucracy, and aftermath. America right now is between the fourth and fifth stages, or you might say that the older generation is mostly in Bam Tenherschaft, and the younger generation is moving into Grummet rapidly. Joe took another stiff drink and shook his head. But why do they leave so much of it out in the open? I mean, not merely the really shocking things you told me about, the Bugs Bunny cartoons, but putting the pyramid on the dollar bill where everybody sees it almost every day. Hell, Simon said. Look what Beethoven did when Weishaupt illuminated him. Went right home and wrote the Fifth Symphony. You know how it begins. Da-da-da-dum. Morse code for V, the Roman numeral for 5. Right out in the open, as you say. It amuses the devil out of them to confirm their low opinion of the rest of humanity by putting things up front like that and watching how everybody misses it. Of course, if somebody doesn't miss something, they recruit him right away. Look at Genesis, Lux Fiat, right on the first page. They do it all the time. The Pentagon Building, 23 Skidoo. The lyrics of rock songs like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. How obviously can you get? Melville was one of the most outrageous of the bunch. The very first sentence of Moby Dick tells you he's a disciple of Hassan-i Shabah, but you can't find a single Melville scholar who has followed up that lead, in spite of Ahab being a truncated anagram of Sabah. He even tells you again and again, directly and indirectly, that Moby Dick and Leviathan are the same creature, and that Moby Dick is often seen at the same time in two different parts of the world. But not one reader in a million groks what he's hinting at. There's a whole chapter on whiteness and why white is really more terrifying than black. All the critics miss the point. Osiris is a black god, Joe quoted. Right on. You're going to advance fast, Simon said enthusiastically. In fact, I think it's time for you to get off the verbal level and really confront your own Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, your own Lady Isis. Yes, Dillinger said. The Leif Erikson is laying offshore near California right now. Hagbard is running some hashish to the students at Berkeley. He's got a new black chick in his crew who plays the Lucy role extremely well. We'll have him send her ashore for the right. I suggest that you two drive up to the Norton Lodge in Frisco and I'll arrange for her to meet you there. I don't like dealing with Hagbard, Simon said. He's a right-wing nut, and so is his whole gang. He's one of the best allies we have against the Illuminati, Dillinger said. Besides, I want to exchange some hemp script for some of his flax script. Right now, the Mad Dog Bunch won't accept anything but flax script. They think Nixon is really going to knock the bottom out of the hemp market. And you know what they do with the Federal Reserve notes? Every time they get one, they burn it. Instant demurrage, they call it. Puerile, Simon pronounced. It will take decades to undermine the feds that way. Well, Dillinger said, those are the kinds of people we have to deal with. The jams can't do it all alone, you know. Sure, Simon shrugged, but it bugs me. He stood up and put his drink on the table. Let's go, he said to Joe. You're going to be illuminized. Dillinger accompanied him to the door, then leaned close to Joe and said, a word of advice about the right. Yes? Dillinger lowered his voice. Lie down on the floor and keep calm, he said, and his old impudent grin flashed wickedly. Joe stood there looking at the mocking bandit, and it seemed to him a freeze in time, a moment that would linger as another stage of illumination forever in his mind. Sister Cecilia, back in Resurrection School, spoke out of the abyss of memory. Stand in the corner, Joseph Malik. And he remembered, too, the chalk that he crumbled slowly between his fingers, the feeling of needing to urinate, the long wait, and then Father Volpe entering the classroom, his voice like thunder. Where is he? Where is the boy who dared to disagree with the good sister that God sent to instruct him? And the other children, led out of the classroom and across the street to the church to pray for his soul, while the priest harangued him. Do you know how hot hell is? Do you know how hot the worst part of hell is? That's where they send people who have the good fortune to be born into the church and then rebel against it, misled by pride of intellect. And 5 years later, those two faces came back. The priest, angry and dogmatic, demanding obedience, and the bandit, sardonic, encouraging cynicism, and Joe understood that he might someday have to kill Hagbard Celine. But more years had to pass, and the Fernando Poo incident had to pass, and Joe had to plan the bombing of his own magazine with Tobias Knight before he knew that he would, in fact, kill Celine without compunction if it were necessary. But on March 31st, in that year of fruition for all the Illuminati's plans, while the President of the United States went on the air to threaten all-out thermonuclear heck, a young lady named Concepcion Galore lay nude on a bed in the Hotel de Redi in Santa Isabel and said, It's a Loigor. What's a Loigor? Asked her companion, an English man named Physian Chips, who had been born on Hiroshima Day and named by a father who cared more for physics than for the humanities. Fish and chips. Okay. The room was in the luxury suite of the Hotel de Ruddy, which meant that it was decorated in an abominable Spanish Moorish decor. The sheets were changed daily to a less luxurious suite. The cockroaches were minimal, and the plumbing sometimes worked. Concepcion contemplated the bullfight mural on the opposite wall, Meneletti turning an elegant Veronica on an unconvincingly drawn bull, and said thoughtfully, "Oh, a Loigor is a god of the black people, the natives, a very bad god." Chips glanced at the statue again and said, more to himself than to the peasant girl, "Looks vaguely like Tlaloc in Mexico City, crossed with one of those Polynesian Cthulhu tikis." "The Starry Wisdom people are very interested in these statues," Concepcion said, just to be making the conversation, since it was obvious that Chips wasn't going to be ready to prong her again for at least another half hour. "Indeed," Chips said, equally bored. "Who are the Starry Wisdom people?" "Church. Down on Tequila Imota Street, what used to be Lumumba Street and was Franco Street when I was a girl. Funny church." The girl frowned, thinking about them. "When I worked in a telegraph office, I was always seeing their telegrams, all in code, and never to another church. Always to banks all over Europe and North and South America." "You don't say," drawled Chips, no longer bored but trying to sound casual. His code number in British intelligence was, of course, 005. "Why are they interested in these statues?" He was thinking that statues, properly hollowed out, could transport heroin. He was already sure that Starry Wisdom was a front for Bugger. In 1933 at Harvard, Professor Tokus told his Psychology 101 class, "Now the child feels frightened and inferior, according to Adler, because he is in fact physically smaller and weaker than the adult. Thus, he knows he has no chance of successful rebellion, but nevertheless he dreams about it. This is the origin of the Oedipus complex in Adler's system. Not sex, but the will to power itself. The class will readily see the influence of Nietzsche." Robert Putney Drake, glancing around the room, was quite sure that most of the students would not readily see anything, and Tokus himself didn't really see either. The child, Drake had decided, it was the cornerstone of his own system of psychology, was not brainwashed by sentimentality, religion, ethics, and other bullshit. The child saw clearly that, in every relationship, there is a dominant party and a submissive party, and the child, in its quite correct egotism, determined to become the dominant party. It was that simple. Except, of course, that the brainwashing takes effect eventually in most cases, and by about this time, the college years, most of them were ready to become robots and accept the submissive role. Professor Tokus droned on, and Drake, serene in his lack of superego, continued to dream of how he would seize the dominant role. In New York, Arthur Flagenheimer, Drake's psychic twin, stood before 17 robed figures, one wearing a goat's head mask, and repeated, "I will forever heal, always conceal, never reveal, any art or arts, part or parts." "You look like a robot," Joe Malik says in a warped room in a skewered time in San Francisco. "I mean, you move and walk like a robot." "Hold on to that, Mr. Wabbit," says a bearded young man with a saturnine smile. "Some trippers see themselves as robots. Others see the guide as a robot. Hold that perspective. Is it a hallucination, or is it a recognition of something we usually black out?" "Wait," Joe says. "Part of you is like a robot, but part of you is alive, like a growing thing, a tree, or a plant." The young man continues to smile, his face drifting above his body toward the mandala painted on the ceiling. "Well," he asks, "do you think that might be a good poetic shorthand? That part of me is mechanical, like a robot, and part of me is organic, like a rosebush? And what's the difference between the mechanical and the organic? Isn't a rosebush a kind of machine used by the DNA code to produce more rosebushes?" "No," Joe says. "Everything is mechanical, but people are different. A cat has a grace that we've lost, or partly lost." "How do you think we've lost it?" And Joe sees the face of Father Volpe, and hears the voice screaming about submission. The SAC bases await the presidential order to take off for Fernando Poo. Atlanta Hope addresses a rally in Atlanta, Georgia, protesting the gutless appeasement of the Comsimp administration and not threatening to bomb Moscow and Peking the same time as Santa Isabel. The premier of Russia rereads his speech nervously as the TV cameras are set up in his office, and in socialist solidarity with the freedom-loving people of Fernando Poo. The chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, having found the thought of Chairman Mao of little avail, throws the I Ching sticks and looks dismally at hexagram 23, and 99% of the peoples of the world wait for their leaders to tell them what to do. But in Santa Isabel itself, 3 locked doors across the suite from the now sleeping Concepcion, Fish and Chips says angrily into his shortwave, "Repeat, none. Not one Russian or Chinese anywhere on the bloody island. I don't care what Washington says. I'm telling you what I have seen. Now about the bugger heroin ring here. Sign off," the submarine tells him. HQ is not interested in bugger or heroin right now. Damn and blast, Chip stares at the shortwave set. That bloody well tore it. He would just have to proceed on his own and show those armchair agents back in London, especially that smug W, how little they actually know about the real problem in Fernando Poo and the world. Storming, he charged back to the bedroom. I'll just get dressed, he thought furiously, including my smoke bombs and Luger and laser ray, and toddle over to this starry Wisdom Church and see what I can nose out. But when he tore open the bedroom door, he stopped, momentarily stunned. Concepcion still lay in the bed, but she was no longer sleeping. Her throat was neatly cut, and a curious dagger with the flame design on it stuck into the pillow beside her. "Damn, blast and thunder," cried 005. "Now that absolutely tears it. Every time I find a good piece of ass, those fuckers from Bugger come along and shaft her." 10 minutes later, the go signal came from the White House. A fleet of SAC bombers headed for Santa Isabel with hydrogen bombs and fission chips, fully dressed, toddled over to the Starry Wisdom Church, where he encountered not Bugger, but something on an entirely different plane.